There's perhaps no better sentiment to be able to share in the days after a game than the classic old whichever team won deserved it. This weekend, the All Blacks, looking to bring down the curtain on a bumpy old first year for Scott Robertson, snuck a game that lived out that phrase beautifully against an England team who look on the brink of igniting something very, very special under Steve Borthwick they've been building for the last 2 years. George Ford scraping a last-second drop goal just wide in an absolutely superb game to kick off this November's big block of big men running at each other, but even quicker and harder than they normally do when playing for teams not named after countries. So, with the end-of-year tour now well underway, it's time to dig into its excellent opener. How did the All Blacks sneak the result? How close are England to that magical thing they continue to be building? And which of these two teams, who both deserved it, really deserved it the most? I think it's fair to say the majority of the chat around the English national rugby union team during the Gregorian calendar year 2024 has been about their defence, and with good reason. The defensive game has now become England's main weapon, their main way of going forwards and turning momentum, of controlling a match. And whilst there was some talk of whether new defence coach Joe El Abd would change the system from what outgoing guy Felix Jones had them running, his first game has showed us it's just the odd tweak to an aggressive, brilliant core remaining from the summer and Six Nations. That system remaining in place and putting unbelievable pressure on the All Blacks. England felt in control for more of the game than they didn't, and so much that comes down to and from their defence. This is a brilliant example of exactly what they're looking to do. Spencer rolls the ball out the ruck here, which incidentally is the correct call. Replays here are misleading, and you understand why both the Kiwi and English commentators criticise the call, but the initial broadcast angle shows the ball come out the ruck sideways, not backwards, which Lomax spots, gifting the All Blacks a turnover. But as it rolls out, watch the speed at which Cunningham himself adjusts in defence and sets his target, flying up with Lawrence, who catches Surveyor behind the gain line. The back foot ball has meant NZ haven't been able to set anything attack-wise, but the English defence is in shape so quickly that nothing is on here. Geordie Barrett makes a great spot. Atoje is folding around the ruck as the ball leaves the breakdown, meaning he has to hustle to get into position instead of drifting just into the space, opening a gap behind him, but the lock adjusts and makes a brilliant tackle before leaping back up to his feet and contesting the breakdown. He knows the chance of getting the ball here is slim, but he's just such a nuisance, tying multiple carries in and slowing down the scrum half's path to the ball. This ruck ends up taking 6 seconds, which is extremely low in Test Rugby in 2024. Generally, around half of the All Blacks rucks this year are 2 seconds or fewer, and it buys the Rose Boys time to get into shape. This England line is perfect. Maybe the best defensive picture you'll see all year. The line speed is then superb. If Surveyor carries, Genge smokes him. Stewart has the tip onto Barrett lined up, and it allows Curry to drift out early. Surveyor has thrown the pass to Barrett's outside, so he can do that thing he does where he drifts onto it and brings some lovely trademark Bodie dynamism to the attack. But instead of watching the man, Curry just flies up straight into the path of the ball at the space Bowden is planning to run into. Suddenly, if Barrett carries on his trajectory to make the catch, he's getting turned into a side dish for Curry. And so to avoid the spicy tackle, tries to tip it on. Tamati Williams has to adjust as 2 white shirts smack into his space and he knocks it on. An utterly brilliant spell of defense, aggressive, controlled, instant, and instead of generic, built around the unique gifts of players like Mauro Itoje and Tom Curry. And another instantly iconic moment of unique gift work showed up towards the end of that first half as Chandler Cunningham himself lived up to his name, the Cunning bit. He didn't become a wisecracking roommate played by Matthew Perry, though I guess he's in the South, so that bit kind of checks out too. With this shot blindsiding Tupou Vaa'i with an enormous tackle, one of the best tackles of the year. But to be incredibly boring for a moment, it also comes from a moment of brilliant tactical innovation from England and Joe El Abd. The winger is maybe the most important player in this England defence. In order to flood the field inside him, as it did to Barrett and Williams earlier, and create that immense line speed pressure, the winger is sometimes left with almost half the pitch to cover because they want everyone else to be congested to put maximum pressure on the opposition. That's exactly the situation Tommy Freeman finds himself in here. This is a 4-on-1 for the All Blacks with 25 metres width to play into, but England just trust him to make the best decision and the tackle to go with it. And he does just that, smashing Will Jordan, and it allows the other key cog, the Springbok style catch-up defender, in this case Henry Slade, rushing out wide in behind the moment the ball goes past him, it goes wide, to get a boot to that ball and put pressure back on New Zealand. For several phases in a row then, England now in the ascendancy apply further pressure, Bowden Barrett eventually putting the ball into touch behind where Talea regathered the pill initially. Sometimes a shot like Freeman's isn't possible, and that means you end up with situations like this, where the number of All Black sliding parts leads to Faye Bosa repositioning himself multiple times. His goal here is just to buy time for the incredibly aggressive fullback option, Lieutenant Furbank with a 50-metre run-up, to come into the line and smash Will Jordan. This fullback coming up was a big part of the English defence. And here, at least, it ends up going backwards and Barrett forced to kick it away, landing it in Tommy Freeman's arms on almost exactly the spot they'd thrown into the line-out a few seconds ago. And so, knowing they like the winger or a back three player in this position to make big, aggressive shots, for this entire passage of play, England dropped Freeman out to become a second fullback and deploy Cunningham himself as their winger. Now, knowing this is a risk, England makes sure to prevent the ball getting into Leo on the touchline by any means necessary. Spotting numbers, Atoja here, for example, flies out a line to disconnect Barrett from the line before Curry makes a mess of the resulting breakdown. It leaves the All Blacks with slow ball once again, Surveyor carrying on the back foot. However, he's Ardie Surveyor, so obviously he makes it up to the gain line, but England now have their D set better than the All Blacks A. Every option this short side is covered, and it leads to Barrett losing 5 metres and allowing Atoja and Curry to slow it down once again. Body sucked in. Barrett is back in position, but seeing as the phase on the other side a moment ago involved both centres, he's the only back on this side before Talea on the far extreme. This lack of a proper distributor gives Cunningham himself the licence. He knows there's only 2 players that can possibly receive this ball and starts to come in. And once Barrett shapes to give it to one of them, he commits and he thunders at Tupova's ribs. The lock totally unprepared for the tackle coming from outside his range of vision. It's an incredible hit, but in a less bold defensive system, it never gets made, as Cunningham himself would be somewhere over here in the middle of the pitch, defending up direct. Instead, England allowed him a view of the full width of the field and chance to pick his moment, and subsequently his choice of ribs on Tupovai. This is defence as a weapon rather than as a containment unit. Get your best players in situations where they can do something to change the game instead of simply preventing the opposition. And it's brilliant. The match was just filled with these moments. It broadly put England in control of the game. Even if New Zealand winning feels like a fair result, it also feels fair that England scored points on more occasions than New Zealand, because they were, simply put, the team exerting and controlling pressure more often than the Kiwis. Atoje and Cunningham himself both were utterly exceptional in a performance controlled really smartly by Marcus Smith and Ben Spencer over that first hour. And yet, for all the brilliance of England's defence, New Zealand continued to pierce it. Whether it's with these 3 tries scored by Mark Talea and Will Jordan, or in the various breaks they made that weren't finished, the All Black attack clearly primed what England was going to bring, an unstoppable force well aware of the immovable object it was about to run into. I noticed 3 main trends in the All Black attack on Saturday, all products of simple observation. Where back when Joe Schmidt was sat in the coach's box, the All Blacks were devising specialist plays to pull a team out of shape over several phases. You know, we'll go here, then this player will move into this position, then we attack that position. The Razor approach instead is a bit more laid back, which can sometimes lead to more blunted execution, but ultimately, on Saturday, created more chances because you're not relying on individual moments. Key playmakers like Jordan and the collective Barrett just clearly loaded up on things to look out for, different situations that might come up in the game, Bowden in particular having an extremely switched on afternoon. The first of these 3 was the simple, classic chip over the top of rush defence, an age-old staple of overcoming an aggressive wedge of big boys in your face. And New Zealand so almost used that to great effect a number of times, the best of them all being this first phase move. Knowing England will expect a carry from Surveyor, what often being the All Blacks' biggest carrier and all, they instead have him stick it on the toe at the last second. The kick's great and chase superb, but Slade does well to just nudge Leonard Brown as he's chasing, slowing the centre a second and potentially saving a try. If Surveyor can drop this on the boot a split second later, maybe Slade doesn't get the chance, and this is a score. The second trend was even more risky than giving Ardie a taste of the fly-off lifestyle. As previously stated, the wingers in the English defence are absolutely vital, perhaps the most important cog. But when defending the opposition 22, the white gang tend to drop at least 1, as well as usually the fly half, into the backfield to cover for the clearance, usually down to 10, 11 maybe men. This leaves the centres pulling double duty. Henry Slade often acting as both the wing and the 13. And as such, it's in this area, in your own 22, that the English defence is weakest by far. It's a kind of risk-reward gamble from England, chancing their arm on the opposition not running from deep, but on Saturday, they were playing against the All Blacks, the team that have built a sport-defining brand on running from anywhere. And so Razor put Barrett on red alert to be ready for chances to call their bluff at all times. With both centres on the blind side here, England have wound up with Will Stewart in the 13 channel, and it leaves Tom Curry having to cover too much space to keep the prop from being exposed on his own. And hence, opening up a hole on the inside for Geordie Barrett to run right through once he decided to go for the charge down. Time after time, we saw the All Blacks just find space from inside their own 22. What England are looking for is moments like this. Bodie spotting Slade is totally isolated on his own. He's the only defender covering almost half the pitch, and it's 100% on to play. But England adapt beautifully, brilliantly, and show why they continue to take this risk. Faye Bosa flies up last second from deep, buying Slade time, and hence Slade can buy time for Curry to make a double effort and smash Jordan and force a knock on. However, it was the third trend that showed most on the scoreboard, as New Zealand, in a very evolved 2024 way, returned to one of the oldest core principles of playing rugby in the backs. At all times, if you can, target the big lad. As with South Africa, England's defence is built enormously around the catch-up defender, a guy who generally starts near the ruck, but as the ball goes wide, pins his ears back and hairs it for the touchline, providing a kind of safety blanket for players making aggressive shots, as there'll always be someone covering him behind, slotting in as a kind of second wave of defence just in case. However, when normally you want to be a back row or lock, sometimes you're in a situation after the All Blacks have played phase after phase and you're reduced a bit where you have to prioritise. And in those situations, England would normally place a more athletic player on the open side and are not adverse to plonking Jamie George or Ellis Genge in that role on the blind side, nearer the touchline, if they're not expecting the opposition to go down the narrow side. And this is something that came back to bite them. Multilayer's opening try comes ultimately from a ridiculous moment of world classing from the phenomenal Wallace Atiti, who had an absolutely unbelievable game, getting his arms free in the tackle to offload for Talea to do that thing he does down the wing. But if you rewind a moment, it begins with a superb spot by Beauden Barrett. After a decent set of carries here, the All Blacks are set to play in field with Barrett wrapping around onto the open side, but as the last phase is being played, Barrett spots something. With Curry playing the catch-up role, the flanker bounces in to fill that place on the open side, and it leaves Genge filling in on the blind side. Bodie overrules his play and calls for another phase down the blind side, with his brother listening and filling in onto Titi's inside. Don't get me wrong, right? I think Bodie's thinking maybe a little pop pass here can lead to a dominant carry, rather than maybe he'll do this and it'll lead to a try, but it just shows him thinking on his feet and staying alert all the same. As per the system, fullback George Furbank flies in to make an aggressive shot, and it leaves Talea unmarked. And now up against loosehead prop Genge, playing that catch-up role, who he skins with ease. If this is Curry, Talea is stopped short, possibly put into touch, but the repeated phase-playing carries have stressed the England defence enough to leave one player in a less ideal position, and the try comes from there. You can make the argument that Furbank perhaps needs to sit off just in case Atiti does get the ball loose, but that's not what this England defence is about. You'd be asking them to go back on their whole philosophy. That's how a containment team play. England's defence is supposed to be a weapon, a bludgeon, a double shot on their key carrier to change momentum, is the idea here. They knock New Zealand backwards and perhaps win a turnover in a phase or so's time. You can't legislate for exceptions, and Wallace's here is just exceptional, allowing Talea to pull off another brilliant finish. However, a cleaner still example came in the second try, finished by William Jord. It's ultimately simple rugby, but a product of that England defence and how New Zealand managed to exploit it. The All Blacks play a succession of phases off the line-out, once again, Barrett not involved, standing off, entirely playing it off 9. It leaves this picture. Because they want their most athletic boys on the open side to fly up and smash, force that knock on, England let Genge once again be the sacrificial lamb watching the blind side, so that the Currys and so on of the world can all be in the main line to pressure the All Black carriers here. The only New Zealand body on this side initially is Caleb Clark, so England figure winger Faye Bosa and Furbank alone are enough to cover it, with Genge watching for a snipe from the scrum half, but the All Blacks have other ideas. With IFW having to watch Clark, it means he's always pressing out, he's always working up towards the touchline, and so in order to stay connected, once the ball comes this way, Genge is going to have to do that as well. Beauden spots Genge having filled on the short side immediately. The amount of space him and Faye Bosa alone are covering is enormous, and he flashes around with Jordan, who spots how hard Genge in return then drifts to keep up with Barrett and switches back, running a simple but brilliant scissors, putting him right through and outpacing Freeman to score. It's ticking back to the instincts of basic schools rugby in order to open up one of the world's best defences. It's extremely All Blacks. Where most teams so far have looked the wide channels where the space appears to be to get around England's new defence, the Kiwis on Saturday made the space come to them, and they were utterly ruthless. And it was his clinical sense of battling that ultimately got them back in the game after Faye Weboso's superb try put England into a commanding lead. The intercept here is a brilliant bit of defence by Marcus Smith. He's initially just trying to get in the eye line, more looking to try and prompt the knock on, make the catch difficult, or make the pass even harder, knowing worst case scenario here, right? It's probably a floated ball over the top and he has time to adjust. I almost think he can't believe his luck when he said the ball goes straight to him, allowing him to burst upfield with that trademark acceleration. And his pass then is brilliant. Most players will either pin their ears back or go and give the ball right away the moment Ioane comes into shot, but this forced little dummy gets the centre to commit to him, allowing Furbank to then in turn give the early ball for the winger to fly over and score. England's one try that they've scored. Yeah, in the kind of classic All Black fashion we're slowly seeing them return to, they found a try out of nowhere in those dying minutes. With this sequence of carries once again getting them on the front foot, New Zealand congest their pack here, all carrying options together, and it forces England to do the same, matching them dude for dude, as they like to get that flying up, that disconnect, that aggressive spirit and press. However, last second, Kane instead drops it behind, and Jordan avoids Randall's pressure to get it wide. The All Blacks have numbers here, but this is a great bit of defence by Tommy Freeman, coming in to cut off Ioane from his support. He carries, but if we look at the picture here, the following phase is probably going to be a walk-in for New Zealand. There's a huge overlap and not many England players coming across. However, thankfully for the Rose Gang, the one player they do have coming across is Mario Itoje, who clocks this. He goes straight into the ruck and commits a deliberate professional foul, a full-on Richie McCaw moment against the black shirts themselves. The referee even makes eye contact with him and tells him to release it, but he doesn't listen. He just looks him dead in the eye and goes, "No, penalise me," just holding the ball until a penalty is given long after advantage is called. It's frankly a clear yellow card offence, but Itoje knows they aren't on a warning, they haven't been penalised for a little while, so it's not going to be given. It's a genius bit of cheating and essentially buys England almost infinite time, around a full minute, to set up for the next phase, which comes from a quick tap on the same spot, allowing them to then get on top the next few phases. Finn Baxter making a brilliant smash tackle, driving the All Blacks backwards over the next few phases. However, New Zealand just set the basics so well. Again, it's classic New Zealand rugby. Damien McKenzie really sells he's going to get the ball here, prompting Randall and Slade to both watch him, and as such, when Amua carries instead, it grants New Zealand that front foot ball, carrying into less interested defenders. From here, Earl then gives away a penalty, and New Zealand decide to gamble. D-Mac takes it directly, running a France-style, really flat stretch movement. Jordan expanding onto Freeman's outside, and prompting the last defender to watch him as well, before giving the pass, which ultimately leaves Mark Talea one-on-one against George Ford. Now, hiding your undersized number 10 is a classic part of rugby union. It's a big part of the sport. But England have later been doing that in really interesting, innovative ways. Instead of dropping him onto the wing or permanently in the backfield, they often use Smith or Ford to blitz, getting in the eye-line to create pressure, a la the intercept. Here, knowing he's the least useful defender they have, England deploy Ford as a dummy jackler, shoving him in the ruck, knowing he'll prompt a couple of All Black bodies to commit by force of habit, without assessing that it's a guy who's never going to win a turnover, thus taking those bodies out of the attack for the following phase. However, in the 22, where the stakes are higher, where tackles need to be made, England instead just hide him on the wing, in the backfield, covering in case for a chip or a grubber. And he makes the exact opposite decision to Furbank in the first half, drifting off, staying out instead of going in for the double shot, and it does no good. He wraps him up, but Talea is just ridiculous. He's so strong in these situations. Just a world-class slippery finisher, and he wriggles his way right up the line, dotting down for an unbelievable finish and ultimately the winning try. The All Blacks' attack was broadly superb pretty much all day, constantly creating little moments to get the likes of Surveyor, Satiti, Talea, Jordan and the collective Barretts into space to do what they do best, and ultimately, 3 of those moments paying off was enough for them to win the game. And yet, it so almost wasn't, as England did have another couple of chances to take it. First, through this penalty off the post, and then, as Scott Robertson put it post-match, the first drop goal George Ford has ever missed in his life. They're handed the situation from a knock-on by Tuipulotu, but frankly, from that moment on, England get almost everything wrong here. Something very unlike them. Probably the best team in the world at drop goals over the last couple of years. The setup off the scrum is poor. Ford being stood behind the scrum means when Randall spins out, rescuing the ball, he has no idea where his 10 is, and it causes England to lose ground immediately. The work rate of Tuipulotu, however, to fly out and smash him from a dominant scrum is unreal and sets the tone for New Zealand, repelling and containing England over and over again. With Ford falling into the pocket early, the Kiwis know there's nothing on their minds other than the drop goal, so all they've got to do is front up and wait for the phase where England pull the trigger to make the maximum effort. And so they do. Brilliant line speed, time after time, stopping them getting any momentum. And then he reached this position. Frankly, this phase might have been the one. Blockers are in place and Randall has a chance to hit forwards inside, allowing him to strike across his body, but instead they play one more phase for reasons unknown, and it gives New Zealand time to set. Roygaard is back up to his feet, already bouncing and ready, and puts enormous pressure on without blockers now in his way at all. And perhaps most importantly, Harry Randall's pass is, let's be diplomatic and say not good. It's looping above Ford's head and aimed directly at him instead of on his outside so he can drop it immediately. Instead, he's got to adjust twice. The actions of the two nines cutting down, perhaps the world's best drop goal merchant, into just another guy trying for a kick. It's an unbelievable effort from the All Blacks to see it veer wide. A moment of panic and bad fortune costing England. The team who deserved to win, sliding from white to black in a second. However, whilst we can talk about that one missed chance, I think the real turning point in the game for England came earlier on. Around the hour mark, 8 points up and in total control of the game, the team settled down. England have only scored 3 points in the last half hour of their last 3 tests combined. That's 90 minutes of rugby, and to me, that boils down the kind of one remaining big issue with Borthwick's bunch at the minute. A team whose game is now broadly extremely close to where they want it to be. Pretty much every area of the game is really strong now, with one instinctive exception. Because I think England still lack the kind of sixth sense for ruthlessness that truly separates the very, very good teams from the best teams in the world. For me, this was that moment. England were in total control for a solid 15 minutes here. Faye Reboso has just scored. Marcus Smith then hits a 50-22. And after having a try rubbed out, they proceed to dominate New Zealand in defence, run a brilliant attacking set to make it 30 metres, and even when the Kiwis break away and score a try in response, the Timo rules it out and gives England a penalty solidly within the half. Everything is going the Red Rose way. Everything is with them. The crowd is in rapture. Belief is huge. Momentum is with England, and New Zealand look heartbroken after their one reply, their only positive moment in 15 whole minutes of rugby, came up in vain and resulted in an England penalty. England all day had taken 3 points, largely in the belief the moment to go for the jugular would come at some stage. And it does, right here, the apex of the performance. The time finally to go for broke and hit the corner, to ride that momentum, that crowd noise, that belief, that building team spirit into a score, a try that could break Kiwi spirits. This is the moment at which an England try will be most devastating for New Zealand, and that emotional context is vital to understand. And yet England opt for free. The Roses had moments like this, beats where everything was going their way, where the emotional damage a try could cause their opponent might be terminal in all 5 of their games against top 5 opposition this year. And yet the only game of that bunch that they won against Ireland in the Six Nations was the one where they made the brave decision to go for the corner instead of the free, Benno crashing over this critical try that led to Marcus Smith being able to kick that drop goal in the final play. There will be critics, as always, out there saying England need to be braver and bolder in attack and run the ball more in general and whatever. And whilst I don't agree with that, I think the game plan they've got's really working and really strong. If they're going to defeat South Africa in 2 weeks' time, a side who beat New Zealand twice this summer, largely for identifying these moments of momentum perfectly and capitalising on them, turning into tries mostly for Malcolm Marx, they urgently need to start identifying these critical moments and games when they come up and finding the bravery required to ride them. Because ultimately, this was a game where whichever team won would have deserved it. New Zealand, throughout the entire 80s, stayed bold, brave, and took the chances that came to them. Mackenzie knocking over a brilliant conversion to win it. And it sets up now a clash with Ireland this Friday night beautifully. The All Blacks desperate to set things right in one of the few grounds worldwide where they're on a losing streak. Whilst after a string of narrow losses, England will be desperate this weekend against Australia to finally go beyond just being the team who deserved to win and become the one who actually takes it. Thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. It's the start of the Autumn Nation series, to give it its proper Christian name. There'll be more coming. We'll look at Ireland, New Zealand in the coming week. Potentially other games, Scotland, South Africa as well.
Yeah, England, South Africa in a couple of weeks. That might be interesting.
That
Who
should
knows?
be good. That should be exciting. There's loads to come. We might not wear hats then. Who's to know? There's also a podcast on the 2014 Women's World Cup. You want to go and have a look there. There's a video we did on Warren Gatland and Wales in general, looking at the state of Wales at the moment. That's elsewhere on the channel. That'll pop up in a moment.
And also, here's a wild thing. If you want to search for Squidge Rugby on TikTok, that's a thing that you can follow now.
Yes.
There's going to be some short little videos on there because TikTok doesn't allow 40-minute deep dives.
Yeah, I am old and feel very old every time I've opened it. But yeah, that's an option if you want to have a look there. There's loads of stuff going on. Yeah, have a look at the Gatland video. Have a look at whatever's coming up in the next few days. We might do some previews. We're looking into that as well. And we'll see you very soon for more rugby.
Have you been practicing?